screen, but oh, there we go. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call the Subcommittee Employee Relations meeting to order for October 1st of 2021. It's nice to see everyone and on the Zoom this afternoon. And so I see that we have a quorum, so we don't need to take attendance and we can just proceed ahead. Has anybody had an opportunity to take a look at the minutes? If so, I'd appreciate a motion if that's possible.
Chair Lilly, I'll move approval of the minutes from the last meeting.
Thank you.
On August 17th meeting.
Thank you, Senator Bingham. Any questions to the minutes that have been moved? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Those opposed? Thank you, Senator Bingham. We have our minutes approved. And so today we have a bunch of contracts that are before us. And so we've invited the MMB to kind of kick it off and kind of go through each one is a little bit different. They're quite similar, but and these cover some of the largest groups of the state workers that we have for Minnesota. And as has been the tradition kind of in the past, many of these contracts are quite similar, and I'm sure that'll be covered. But I'm kind of excited to hear from these folks, and the commissioner as he catches up, or someone else will have to do that work. But with the competitive job market that we're seeing outside in the real world, and then with the challenges of COVID, I'm curious to hear how this is going. And so whoever we'd like, maybe you can introduce yourself and please go ahead when you're ready. And then when the commissioner comes, perhaps we can switch chairs there. Go ahead, please.
Terrific. Thank you, Chair Lilly, members of the committee. My name is Kristen Batson. I'm the Deputy Commissioner of Enterprise Employee Resources at MMB. And I will get us.
It looks like the commissioner is here. I hate to interrupt. Right when you're getting going, you were doing such a great job.
Terrific. I'm glad he's here.
Okay.
I will hand it over to Commissioner Showalter.
If that's all right with you, that sounds great. Commissioner, welcome. Go ahead and introduce yourself and get us kicking off to hear. Tell us about the work that's going on here today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chair. Sorry, apologies. It's always interesting. Sometimes things just don't quite work out. I'm trying to get in, it doesn't happen. But for the record, my name is Jim Showalter, Commissioner of Minnesota Management and Budget, coming to you through my phone, and happy it seems to be working. As the Deputy Commissioner has started to open, under law, MMB is charged with negotiating contracts with the majority of the bargaining units representing state employees. Really happy to come in front of you and the committee with the tentative agreements that we have reached for your consideration. As Chief Labor Negotiator for the state of Minnesota, I can report that the contracts are reasonable, they're fair, and we're bargained in good faith. The compensation increases included in the contracts are comparable to other public entities in the area and are currently below private sector increases. As we seek to provide high quality public services, we must be able to recruit and retain a high quality workforce. And I believe that these contracts are essential and that we have helped to move forward towards that goal. With that all said, over the past year and a half, I'm not sure how far Deputy Commissioner Batson got into it, but I think the committee is aware of the extraordinary circumstances this past year and a half and how state workers have been impacted by the effects of the global pandemic. Everyone has been impacted by the global pandemic, but state workers have a special role. More than 500 state employees were redeployed across state agencies, and more than 1,000 state workers were reassigned to different jobs. So that their agency or another agency could help ensure that we could meet the needs of Minnesotans during the COVID-19 pandemic. State employees exhibited remarkable flexibility and dedication in these extremely challenging times, and it was a necessary thing to deliver services to Minnesotans. I want to add, that our public union partners also worked with management during this time with creativity and flexibility to make sure that we were able to meet these challenges and facilitate a robust response on the part of state government. So as the effects of COVID-19 affected state revenue, I just have to say that the effects caused both negative and positive swings in the state budget. And so as with probably even more than your average bargaining year, we were always trying to assess where we were at and what we could afford. And we ensured that we could make these contracts costs align with the responsibilities that we have as good stewards of taxpayer dollars. So thank you, Chair Lilly, members, for the chance to come before you. The contracts that you have in front of you for today are the Afscme Master Contract, the Afscme Unit 8 Contract, the Afscme Unit 25 Contract, the Minnesota Association of Professional Employees, Mape Contract, and the submission also includes the insurance provisions as included in the Mape and Afscme labor agreements and what was improved for those units and how those will be applied to other labor agreements and compensation plans. The Afscme, just for context, represents about 16,150 state employees across all state agencies. The Mape contract represents approximately 15,500 professional employees across all state agencies. So these are big deals. In addition to these calendar or 21 to 23 CBAs, you have before you the 2019 to 2021 Minnesota Law Enforcement Association MLEA contract that includes a negotiated wage increase for fiscal years 20 and 21, as well as compensation grids reflecting the legislatively driven compensation increases that were retroactive to October 22nd of 2020. We will submit the remaining 5 contracts as soon as they're ready for your consideration. But that's what we're teeing up for you today. I appreciate the patience in getting me on board, and really appreciate the chance to talk with you today. I'm going to turn it back over to Deputy Commissioner Kristen Batson to walk through the information and help drive into more of the specifics about the contracts. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner, and stick around if you can, and thank you for the introduction. And Ms. Batson, you're off to a good start. If you could keep going. I have one favor. If you could, when you go through it, just kind of put a face on some of these groups, like, what each Afscme group might be, or, just add in a couple of those if you could. Not everyone, but thank you. Ms. Batson.
Excellent. Thank you, Chair Lilly, and we will certainly do that. Again, good afternoon. My name is Kristen Batson. I'm the Deputy Commissioner for Enterprise Employee Relations at MMB, and it's my division, our Labor Relations Division, that's responsible for negotiating the labor agreements that are before you today. We'll start with a timeline. As we've shared before, the process to bring you a contract is extensive and negotiations occur over several months. The contract negotiation process begins even earlier than the timeline that we share here. In the fall of 2020, MMB gathered information from local government and private industry employers regarding their general wage adjustments and any related interest arbitration awards that would impact that. We also solicited information from state agencies regarding their concerns and desired bargaining proposals. And we sought input from external and internal stakeholders, for example, including meetings with the disability community about employment for Minnesotans with disabilities. Once we'd built our foundation in March of 2021, we began bargaining non-economic proposals with Afscme and Mape and conducted coalition insurance bargaining with all of the unions, which we'll touch on more later. We should note that during spring of 21, we obtained 2 important pieces of financial information that inform this process. First, we received updated medical insurance claims, which allowed us to update the premium projections, giving us a much better idea of the cost of medical insurance for the next labor agreement period. We also received information about agency operating budgets for the contract period as established by the legislature. In mid-July, we entered into push week with Afscme and Mape, and we reached tentative agreements for the contracts that expired on June 30th. Continuing on with the timeline, in late summer and early fall, we completed our agreements and our union partners returned to their members for a vote on the contracts. Today, you have before you the culmination of our collective work for the 21-23 Afscme and Mape contracts. Before we dive into the details, I too would like to thank our union partners for their efforts in this process. We value the work of state employees and the important work that they perform on behalf of all Minnesotans, and we value our partnership with the labor unions that represent them. We are concluding bargaining with all of the remaining units, and the remaining ratified and signed negotiated agreements will be sent to this committee for interim approval as they become available. Next, we'll talk a little bit about our insurance coalition bargaining process. Health and dental insurance provisions were a big part of the bargaining process, as always. Bargaining insurance provisions with wage provisions is necessary so that all parties have a clear understanding of the total compensation cost that we're bargaining. The terms of the insurance provisions were bargained through a coalition of all of the state bargaining units, and they were finalized at the end of the bargaining process with Afscme and Mape. This process is one that we've followed for years and it works well. There were several enhancements made to insurance benefits this round, and we'll touch on that later. Next, we'll talk about economics. As we bring these contracts to you for your consideration, we thought it was important to provide a little historical perspective regarding the state's history of across-the-board wage increases. So what you see on this slide is the past 15 two-year rounds of our contract across-the-board increases covering 30 years. Next, we'll talk about the context for this round of bargaining. M&B is responsible for providing you with information that explains and validates our assessment that the contracts we've negotiated and submitted to this subcommittee are in the best interest of the state. These contracts are fair and have been bargained in good faith. And as noted by the commissioner, state workers, like everyone, have been impacted by the effects of the global pandemic, and they continued to do their work on behalf of Minnesotans, and we're very proud of that. I'll now share a bit of additional context for these contracts. Next is little information about market comparison. We don't negotiate contracts in a vacuum, and we do assess other markets to inform our process. Both World at Work and the Conference Board project private industry wage increases of 3% or higher this year. However, as important as that is, we look most closely at public sector trends, especially those from states that are similar to Minnesota and public entities within and near Minnesota that are likely to compete for the same employees. For your reference, we've included comparisons from both similar and bordering states. And we've also included comparisons from counties and cities within Minnesota. Before we look to the 2022-23 Afscme and Mape contracts, I'd like to discuss the changes to the Minnesota Law Enforcement Association contracts. Before you today, you have the MLEA 2019-2021 CBA, and this is the last CBA from the 2019-2021 bargaining cycle. The major terms of this agreement include additional language required by statute regarding arbitrations arising from grievances, as described in Minnesota Statute 626.892.
Recording in progress.
And new wage grids that reflect an ATB of 2.25% in the first year and 2.5% in the second year, and legislative increases of at least 8.45% and more for those at the top step of the range. Members will see total increases of at least 13.2% over the life of the 1921 contract from negotiated across the board increases and legislatively directed increases. In addition, all members will receive either step progression of approximately 4% or a legislatively directed premium of an additional 2% once they are at the top of the salary range. The major economic terms concerning the salary provisions of the Mape and Afscme contracts are all very similar. They include Juneteenth as an added holiday, 2.5% general wage increases for each year of the contract, and progression steps in both years of the contract for about half of the employees who are not already at the maximum of their range. And this step increase is contingent on satisfactory performance, and it averages about 3.2% a year. So first we'll start with the Afscme master contract, and this is a very large contract, and it covers kind of a wide variety of employees, including maintenance workers, general labor workers, general service workers, healthcare workers who are not nurses, clerical workers, and technical workers. So large contract serving a wide variety. For this contract, we have the new paid holiday of Juneteenth, which is consistent with the federal government. For wages, we have a 2.5% across the board increase for each year of the contract. We've increased injured on duty hours to 400 hours, and we continue to permit up to 4 hours of regular pay when treatment is required at a medical facility. And we've increased the deferred compensation match from $175 to $250, encouraging retirement savings. Next, we have the Afscme Unit 8 contract, which covers correctional officers working in prisons. Again, we have the new paid holiday for Juneteenth. Wages, 2.5% increase across the board for each year of the contract. We have an increase of injured on duty pay to 400 hours and continuing to permit up to 4 hours of regular pay when treatment is required at a medical facility. The deferred compensation match increases from $175 to $250. And there's a shift differential of $1.65 per hour for all hours worked either before 6 a.m. or after 6 p.m. And the third Afscme contract is Afscme Unit 25, and that covers radio operators. New paid holiday of Juneteenth, again, consistent with the federal government. And wage increases of 2.5% each year of the contract across the board. A deferred compensation match increase from $200 to $250, and a training differential increase from $1 an hour to $2.75 an hour. And finally, we have Mape, and that Mape contract covers a large number of professional employees that serve in a variety of professional job classifications across state agencies. For that contract, a new paid holiday of Juneteenth, wage increases of 2.5% across the board for each year of the contract, a new bilingual, multilingual sign language differential pilot that gives appointing authorities or state agencies the discretion to compensate employees who communicate with the public in a recognized and approved language other than English, and that includes Braille and American Sign Language. And that occurs on both a recurring and specific basis. And a deferred compensation match increase from $200 to $250. Next, we'll cover a little bit of the changes that affect insurance benefits related to these contracts. Several notable changes were made to the insurance benefit package. We reduced the 35-day waiting period for new employees to a 30-day waiting period. And this was important as most insurance plans end the last day of a month. So a 35-day waiting period means that some new employees need to purchase an additional month of COBRA as they transition into state government. We agreed to cover 3D mammograms under the same conditions that 2D mammograms are covered. And the short-term disability coverage will be offered during open enrollment once every 5 years. Currently, it's only available when the employee first becomes insurance eligible. So this is a fully.
Ms. Batson?
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt for a second. So on these insurance coalition or the insurance changes, does this impact all the contracts? Would it go back to the public safety? Representative Joachim was asking earlier. I just want to make sure like the 3-day thing is with all our employees, or I'm just trying to check and see. It was asked.
Chair Lilly, the insurance changes that were negotiated affect the 22-23 contracts that are before you.
Okay, so it would just be, is the Afscme and Mape or just these Mape? Okay, thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
No problem. Insurance is the same in all contracts.
Okay.
So the short-term disability is a fully employee paid benefit, comes at no cost to the state. The cost for this change is a 5% increase to the fully employee paid premium. However, employees were slated to receive a 10% premium reduction for short-term disability. So instead, they will receive a 5% premium reduction and have the short-term disability open enrollment, which is very popular. Finally, we have changed the emergency room out-of-pocket cost to a flat dollar amount and removed the deductible and the coinsurance. And the goal for this move is that by knowing upfront the exact cost of an emergency room visit, members may choose a lower cost alternative, such as urgent care or their primary care clinic. And the cost for that change is about $75,000. Our health insurance continues to provide comprehensive mental health coverage, and our employee assistance program offers excellent resources for employees, and that has needed now more than ever. These services have always been needed, and in many respects, more so with the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic. Our internal EAP staff worked with state agencies to help employees make the transition to working in the office to working from home. There were a lot of additional family stressors that we all faced related to the pandemic. And this group provided services that were requested both by agencies, by offering webinars, and to help employees on an individual level deal with professional and personal challenges that we've all faced over the past 18 months. We believe our EAP benefit is a great value for both state agencies and their employees, and we're very proud to be able to offer this fine benefit to our employees. Some closing comments. In addition to this presentation, we've provided you with information, data, and analysis that demonstrate the value of the contracts we submitted as required by Minnesota statute section 3.885 subdivision 5. And this includes a comparison of the biennial compensation cost under the current agreement to the projected biennial compensation cost under the proposed agreement, paid with funds appropriated from the general fund and other funds. Additionally, for each contract by agency, MMB has identified the amount of the additional biennial compensation costs that are attributable to salary and wages and to the cost of non-salary and non-wage benefits. The information for these reporting requirements appears in the estimated cost reports for each collective bargaining agreement. I appreciate the ability to share this information with you today. And with that, I will turn it back over to Commissioner Showalter.
Thank you, Ms. Batson. Commissioner Showalter?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the chance to come before the committee today. We've provided information demonstrating the affordability of these labor agreements. We believe they're fair agreements that will help ensure our state is able to retain a talented workforce. We believe these agreements deserve interim approval. We believe the agencies can afford the compensation costs within their budgets as appropriated by the legislature last year. And we ask for your approval of these labor agreements. Your approval tells state employees that the work that they do is critical and that the work that they do is on behalf of their fellow Minnesotans is valued. So thank you so much for your time and consideration, and happy to stand for questions.
Mr. Chair,
Thank you, Commissioner Senator Isaacson.
yeah, I'd like to move approval of SCR 1, please.
Okay, so I have a motion before me, and that's accepted. So I see some hands. We have the motion before us. I believe Representative O'Neill, your hand was up first. If you'd like to go ahead, I'll definitely, Commissioner and Ms. Batson, please stick around for questions. And but Representative O'Neill, please go ahead when you're ready, please.
Thank you, Chair. Senator Isaacson, I would hope that we could at least have a conversation before we jump to that. I think that's a very respectful way to discuss this. And I actually have some points of agreement with the presentation, and I'm actually excited to have this conversation. I looked at these contracts, I looked at the amounts, I compared them against the projections from the previous biennium, as I always do. And I'm actually happy to report that there's some very good news here. And I'm actually impressed with what I'm seeing. So if we could just hold off on that motion just for a moment so we can have a conversation, Chair, could we possibly do that?
Mr. Chair,
Thank you, Representative O'Neill. I've accepted the motion. We have it. I'm more than happy to have lots of discussions. So please go ahead, and I'm glad you've studied. I've always respected your diligence on things, and I certainly would not shut down discussion. So please go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just a point of clarification. I know, Chair, you had asked about the insurance, and typically what we've done, or what has been done, I should say, is that this insurance becomes a pattern for all of the rest of the contracts as well. In fact, the bargaining kind of pattern becomes the pattern for the rest of the contracts. And this is the bulk of what we normally see. This is the largest contracts that come through. The Afscme and Mape contracts are very, very large. And so I think what MMB meant to say is that this is the pattern for all of the contracts moving forward, just to be clear. And it looks like a very good agreement. In any case, when I looked at what was forecasted from the previous biennium, what we thought was going to be spent, and what we looked at the actuals for our biennial base, it's very, and I know COVID did all kinds of things, and so I could definitely see that would affect things. But just for an example, the Afscme Council 5 contract came in at $107 million under projection, actually closer to 108 million when you round up million under the projection, which is really outstanding. I'm guessing that we had a loss of employees. I'm not even sure why that is. So that would be a question. I know we had more spending.
Representative O'Neill, do you want him to answer questions as we go, or do you want to? How would you prefer?
So, Mr. Chair, I just have a small comment after that, and then he can answer the whole lot of it.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'll be very quick. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We did have a few things that were over the projection, particularly the corrections officers. And I know they have gone through so much, and they are so under stress. There's not enough of them. They're doing overtime. And so I fully understand why we're 16,500,000 over budget there, because, and I'm kind of surprised it's that low, honestly, because they've just struggled so heavily. And we're very slightly over in the radio communications operators. But the one I'm not quite sure of, if you could just explain how we got to 108 million under for Afscme, but we're also just slightly over in Mape, about 36 million over in the Mape projection. And I kind of get the Afscme part, but I'm not quite sure why the professional employees, why we have that much. And I'll put that into context, because well, it's 36 million over. the total new biennial money was about 164 projection. That was what we thought we would need more, 164 million. And we were actually 36 million above even that. So I'm just wondering why that would be. And again, I'm super excited that we've saved money here, and I understand that. And I think probably the corrections officers need more support. So with that caveat, so that is my question. If you could explain kind of 107 under and then a couple that are over. I'm just not quite sure why we landed there.
Thank you, Representative O'Neill. Commissioner, do you?
Yeah,
have some- Go ahead, sir.
absolutely. Mr. Chair, Representative, great question, and I appreciated the question and the observations and the follow-up, frankly, on how these things work. And I think you're pointing out something that's really fundamentally important for the SCR to understand, and I think you all do, which is a contract is a snapshot in time, based on a snapshot in time, that it is really a framework for management to operate and to deliver services for Minnesotans. It is not a completely predictable set of situations that are going to be encountered during the course of the year, or certainly over the course of the 2 years. And what your question points that out is that, during the time there's going to be turnover. There's turnover assumptions built into it. There may be more turnover, there may be less turnover. There may be more illness and more overtime that's necessary. There may be some scheduling issues, which ultimately drives more cost or less cost along the way. I think in order to really get into the question about how the contract costing worked out, we probably need to get down to literally to headcounts, about what headcounts were assumed for each period of time and how the contract sort of, what were the amounts associated with it. But that is ultimately, why the legislature sets the appropriations on the front end to say, here's how much money, management, you've got to make it work. And it's our job to go figure out how to make it work. And if we have problems, we'll come back and at least share with you what our problems are. But the bottom line here is that you're pointing out that it isn't an exact prediction of what this contract will cost in the next 2 years, just as the last contract wasn't an exact prediction of what was going to happen during a most unpredictable couple of years.
Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I kind of understood that. I was hoping for a little more context, but in any case, the contracts, the new biennial money in these contracts is actually by and large less than in these 4 contracts. It's basically less than the last time we thought. But my last question, then I'll turn it over to my colleagues. When you're doing comparison to states around us or municipalities around us, are you looking at just across the board raises, or are you also looking at the step increases? Because depending on the bargaining unit, it could be half, it could be 75%. I believe it was in the corrections unit that was nearly 75%, maybe 78% would qualify for a step increase. So we've got a lot of young, new people that's kind of how I read it. So I'm wondering if you could just give me that small little answer of what are we comparing? Is it just across the board, or is it also the step increases?
Thank you. Commissioner or Ms.
Very good.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, Representative, great question again. As the MLEA contract suggests, a total comp is really an important and a difficult thing to get at. And so it takes a lot of work to get at it, to get at that full picture. Our compensation team is excellent. They are well aware of that and aware of those differences in contract circumstances. As the slide suggests, it's not even easy to get at the across the board increase, much less sort of lay all the benefits side by side. But we're certainly aware, and we'll try to dive into those things as we try to sort of understand who we're comparing to. So I think the answer to your question is we're very aware of those differences. I think generally they are pretty static, and so the contract to contract, the ATBs are particularly noticeable. But our comp team is tracking other kinds of changes in health benefits or other benefits along the way.
Representative Neal.
I was listening very attentively, and I don't know that I understood the answer, but I'm not sure if step increases are included, because it could increase someone's salary by as much as 7 or 8% in total. And then when you compound it, so if you do 2.5% compounded, and you do a step increase and then you compound it, I mean, it could be close to 10%. So I'm just asking, are our state contracts in line with, say, North Dakota, South Dakota, Minneapolis, which is what you said, in the totality of it, in the steps and the benefits, or are you solely looking at across the board? Can you just clarify with that? Thank you.
Commissioner, yeah, go ahead, please.
Mr. Chair, our representative, sorry to confuse. Obviously, I think that the key thing is I'm not going to attest that we have done a complete, almost study-like assessment of each jurisdiction. That volume of work would be substantial. Are we aware and do we track what's going on? Absolutely. I would like to, I'm going to bring in the expert so he can tell you exactly how he looks at different jurisdictions. Paul Christensen from our labor relations team is one of those people who are subject matter experts. And Paul, if you can unmute yourself and just sort of walk through how you would compare these jurisdictions.
Mr. Christensen, please introduce yourself and did you hear the question?
Sure, yes, I heard the question. So I'm Paul Christensen, compensation consultant with MMB. Representative O'Neill, that's a really good question. States do vary quite a bit, and to kind of get into that granular data would be very difficult, but we do a couple of things. Number one, we do keep track of the across the board increases. Number two, we do keep track of wages from state to state. For instance, we every year complete the National Compensation Association of State Government surveys, and we compare ourselves to, every state that participates in it, which is about 35 to 40 every year. So I can't tell you exactly, where we would compare to North Dakota as far as where people are in their salary ranges. But the across the board increases, we do feel pretty sound about. And so I don't know how to answer your question in any more detail than that.
Thank you, sir. I think that's helpful. Representative O'Neill?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm going to turn it over. I've got several colleagues that want to speak too, and I saw their heads nodding as I was asking those questions, and we are concerned about comparing apples to apples, obviously, and when you compound step increases plus across the board, it's a different animal than just solely the step increases, just the across the board. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Appreciate the observations on that you pointed out, like in the corrections area. That was, you picked up on that. Representative Albright, I believe your hand was up next. And
it was.
Where are
you.
You? Are you in the mountains?
No, I'm in a place undisclosed, but former Vice President Cheney says hello. I want to refer back to Deputy Commissioner Batson's presentation, and Deputy Commissioner, just have a couple questions of clarification, and then I have some questions more of a global perspective for the Commissioner himself. When we're talking about the, I believe it's the Minnesota Law Enforcement Association contract, and you talk about the retroactive pay that these folks presumably will receive. This goes back at least maybe one, if not two, taxable years. So just from a personal perspective, one, they will be receiving it in the calendar taxable year 2021. And in some cases, those amounts could be very sizable. So I'm wondering what information has been provided to those folks. Do they have opportunity to defer it, or can they amend, or is there opportunity to amend previous tax year returns? Could you just speak to that a little bit?
Ms. Batson.
Mr. Albright, I am sorry, I don't have a good answer to that. It's a good question, but it's technical, and we can certainly get an answer to you from our payroll team about how the income tax of that will be handled.
Representative Albright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Deputy Commissioner, you mentioned in your PowerPoint that the injured on duty increase was 400 hours. What was it before the increase?
Ms. Batson.
Again, thank you for that question. And it varied by contract. And I am going to ask our Labor Relations Director, Jennifer Klossman, who led our bargaining effort, if she remembers what the number was before it was increased.
Thank you. I don't see anybody popping on. Is she here? Ms. Clausen? Is that what you said?
I'm actually getting a note that it was 300 in Afscme Master
Oh, okay.
before this round of bargaining.
Oh, there.
Mr. Chair, and then maybe this is a side segue towards what Representative O'Neill said, but on the Mape contract as an example, you talk about the increases on an annualized basis. So my presumption is that the year-on-year increases that you have tentatively agreed to don't refer back to the initial base salary, but they are increased on an annual basis based upon that new base salary that that individual would be receiving. So that would be correct?
Ms. Batson.
I'm sorry, could you please repeat the question? I want to make sure I understand it correctly.
Yep. Go ahead, Representative Albright, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you're talking about, I think it's 2.5% increases annually. So those increases are based upon the then current year, as opposed to everything referring back to the first initial base year.
Ms.
Is
Batson.
that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
Representative Albright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Commissioner Showalter, in the presentation that the Deputy Commissioner gave, I found it a bit odd that there was no conversation either from you in the contracts themselves or from the provisions dealing with any requirements placed on state workers for COVID-19 requirements. Can you speak to that?
Absolutely.
Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, Representative, I appreciate the question. The contracts that are before you represent the master contracts affecting the terms of state employment. The responsibility for the state to keep a safe workplace, preceded these contracts and will continue during these contracts. So there are provisions in these contracts about that. There's expectations from OSHA for maintaining a safe workplace. This governor's, I assume you're talking about the governor's mandate on vaccination and testing options for state employees that was announced after these contracts came to agreement. So in some ways, they fit inside the context of the terms of work, but they aren't part of the negotiation. They aren't really part of the package that we're bringing before the FCR today.
Thank you, Commissioner. Representative Albright.
So, Mr. Chair, Commissioner, then I guess my first question in what you've just said is, do the master contracts contain definitions or terms of condition for employment that would relate to COVID-19?
Commissioner Showalter.
Mr. Chair, Representative, I'm going to hope to get some expert help on that. I do not believe there are any provisions, but let me see if we can get Jen Klossman unmuted this time to comment if there's any specific provisions referring to COVID-19.
Ms. Glassman, looks like you're ready to go.
I am. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Representative Albright, there is no specific contract language in the CBAs that specifically relate to COVID-19. There's some provisions that certainly folks that potentially have COVID, obviously they can use their sick leave. So there's some pieces that would certainly relate to folks kind of working through the pandemic, but there isn't any specific contract language to COVID-19 itself.
Thank you. Representative Albright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Scholter to Ms. Glassman. So if that's the case, then I'm puzzled because under PELRA, if you're not negotiating those terms and conditions in, isn't that considered an unfair labor practice? And I mean, I'm not trying, this is not a get you question. It's really more of a concern, you know, from the state's perspective that we're negotiating on a topic that has been around all while we've been negotiating these sets of contracts, even if it's the master contract. So why wouldn't we proceed to include those terms and conditions in this master set? And I have a couple more, and then I'll kind of back off and put myself on the list again, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner, or do you want Ms. Glassman to jump on? Seems like a commissioner kind of.
Can you still hear me, Mr. Chair, Representative? You know, the terms and conditions, the contracts that are negotiated do not obviate the state's responsibility to create a safe workplace, and it is a consistent responsibility that, as I said, preceded this and continues. The expectations that state employees are vaccinated and attest to that, and if not, test on a regular basis to have a safe workplace, isn't a term and condition in the way you're trying to describe it for PELRA. And the Minnesota Supreme Court has had cases addressing when these policy items are subject to bargaining and when they're not. And so I think we are following a pretty clear pattern of legal jurisdiction and what is our responsibility as management to ensure that we have a safe workplace. So I appreciate the concern, and it is one that we looked at, but it is not an item that was subject to the bargaining that took place earlier in July, or on the contracts that we're still bargaining at this point.
Thank you, Commissioner. Representative Albright.
Mr. Chair, just final question then for the commissioner himself. So let me understand then, does the executive order suspend the rights of the bargaining unit in your way of thinking about this? What is superior in the hierarchy of authority as you make for a bargaining agreement?
Commissioner Showalter, did you hear the question?
I did, Mr. Chair, Representative. I'm trying to, I will try to answer, but I mean, it's like, you know, to be clear, this is not, you know, a peacetime emergency. This isn't an executive order. This is a policy. It is a policy that does not affect labor contract rights. So it is a different authority. It is one of our management rights. So I probably would need to get a counsel to sort of answer the legal question you asked. What's the hierarchy of powers? I'm not a lawyer by training, and I don't want to answer it wrong. But I got to say that the policy certainly fits within the management responsibilities and rights that we have under this contract or the previous contract, for that matter.
Representative Albright.
I'll circle back with the commissioner after a few more colleagues have had a chance to ask him questions.
Thank you, Representative Albright. Senator Benson, thank you for your waiting.
Mr. Chair, thank you. And Commissioner Showalter, it's good to see you again. Can you talk to me about how COVID funds, the federal COVID money, was used to backfill for employees who had overtime? Because I'm seeing overages, and if they're attributable to extra work that needed to be done due to COVID, then that should have been covered by federal funds. We had adequate federal funds to do that, and it was an allowable expense. So I'd appreciate some explanation as to why we're seeing, if the overages are caused by COVID, please address that, and then why federal funds weren't used to cover those overages. And then the $100 million underspend, where'd that money go? Because a lot of it I asked about, as you are aware, I've asked over and over and over again, where are the savings being accounted for federal funds being substituted for general fund money? So if you could talk me through, did COVID cause these increases? If it did, why wasn't federal money backfilled? And if we had reductions in spending, why didn't those show up in our general fund budget?
Commissioner Showalter.
Mr. Chair, Senator, as usual, great questions. Good to see you as well. The first piece on the accounting of COVID funds, I would want to, frankly, bring another team in to sort of just go through the individual additional ARP or COVID asks and sort of crosswalk with you, because you're right. There are a lot of different, hundreds of different specific items, some of which had labor costs reflected due to additional work time, other circumstances. In general, it was always about trying to keep services going, not a labor payment strategy. But to get to your question there, I think we would need to sort of go through that list of items. And happy to do so if that would be useful. The question about overages, underspending over the course of the year, also, a interest of mine as well as yours and others of, how is a budget change over the course of a year or a biennium? Obviously, there's different costs, different types of things that agencies have to deal with. These last year and a half, plenty of surprises, costs or different things that may have to have happened. You talked about the Department of Corrections as an example of trying to separate prisoners so that you were able to spread individuals out to try to slow down the advance of COVID-19. Different types of ventilation systems that were put in order to try to prevent the virus from being airborne. There are so many different types of things that are well beyond my ability to testify to that right now. But obviously, those are the ups and downs. There are a couple of things that you should just be aware of generally. One is fiscal year close just happened just a little bit ago. So at that point, that basically becomes the number that will show up in the November forecast. At that point in time, we'll have an accounting basically of what was spent during the fiscal year, what was not spent, what cancels back to the general fund. And what came through is requests for technology, requests in the Odyssey Fund. And that is kind of that complete version of, how does that money work and how was it utilized by agency? So a small teaser for the November forecast, at which point we'll all be able to sort of work through all that. Senator, does that get
Chair?
to your concerns?
Yeah, if I could.
Senator Benson.
So, Commissioner Showalter, your predecessor and I had quite a back and forth about the enterprise or Odyssey funds not being canceled at the end of the biennium so that they would show up in the forecast and then be available. But that cancellations, particularly from the Department of Human Services, were put into a fund that carries forward instead of being allowed to cancel. And so as we see this underage of $100 million, first of all, I asked consistently throughout the budgeting process, why aren't we seeing some of these savings? And now feels just a titch like hide the football, but I understand accounting in this environment was the most complicated that any of us will encounter in our lifetime. But if that money was at the Department of Human Services and they transfer it to one of the enterprise funds that doesn't cancel and instead gets carried forward, I would have some deep concerns. And so we are off topic for SER, but I get updates on fund transfers, and so I'll be looking for that. I hope that's not what you're choosing to do, because Commissioner Franz and I had quite a clear disagreement over $14 million being handled that way. And obviously, this amount is more material than 14 million. And I didn't mean to interrupt you, but you raised the close of the year and cancellation of funds. And I don't want to go through that again. It would be nice if it just canceled the way it was supposed to.
Thank you. Did you want the commissioner to continue?
If he wants to
Yep.
respond to my last question, I'd appreciate it.
Commissioner, please go ahead.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, Senator, the last question, if you could just restate it so that I can.
So
Senator Batson.
my last question is, Commissioner, can you certify that the contracts that are before us won't result in a deficiency budget request next year?
Commissioner Showalter.
Mr. Chair, Senator, I anticipated that question, and it's a totally appropriate question. I cannot certify says that we have a level of certainty and an understanding of what's going to come up in the future. I can tell you that we negotiated these contracts knowing what legislative appropriations were, that we have instructed agencies to live within these appropriations, and that we're going to take every action possible to make sure that we do live within these appropriations. That said, we will notify the legislature if there are issues, if there are concerns, if along the way circumstances we were off, that future events are not what we were expecting. So I can tell you, Senator, that we intend to live within these appropriations, that we have no anticipation that the legislature is looking to fund state agencies more, and that we're going to make every effort to live within these appropriations.
Senator Benson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner, we'll be in touch about the other things, actually a lot of accounting things before November. So thank you.
Sure.
Thank you both. Senator Cran.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you
Chair.
for your patience.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'd like to follow up, kind of still down the line of what Representative Albright brought up with Commissioner. When you look at the COVID-19 and the requirements, we've stated, or that it appears to take in the position that COVID vaccine, the vaccine mandate from the governor, not OSHA, from the governor, appears to be a term and condition of employment. Yet you're saying that it doesn't appear to be a term and condition of employment, but being implemented as it is a term and condition of employment. And so when you look at PELRA, it seems pretty straightforward. Terms and condition of employment, including employers' personnel policies affecting the working conditions of an employee. How does that requirement not violate such protection under PELRA? Pretty significant mandate.
Commissioner Showalter.
Mr. Chair, Senator, appreciate the question and sort of the continuing concern over the structure of the management rights and the power restrictions. If Deputy Commissioner Batson could sort of take us a little bit further into this discussion, I think that might be helpful, if that's okay, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Ms. Batson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair,
Deputy.
Senator Cran. Yeah, just a couple things. First of all, just a reminder for the committee that this policy is not a vaccination mandate. It is a requirement to show proof of vaccination or be tested weekly, but it is not a vaccination mandate. Secondly, we can prepare a fuller legal response for this, but we did look into this before crafting the policy, and we're confident that given the legal history on this wasn't indeed an employer policy. And we have, in good faith, met with our labor partners for meet and confers, mostly to address questions and concerns, but also have made a few changes based on their concerns. So I think that's what I have for a response in the moment, but we would be happy to have a fuller response after this hearing as well.
Thank you, Ms. Batson. Senator Cran.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Ms. Batson. So it would seem to be, in what has laid out in your description would make it seem that it is not a mandate, but certainly creating two classes of workers in the rules as far as all of your other policies around equal treatment of others certainly would seem to conflict with those stated goals as well. Follow-up question, any of the labor groups, this seems like a pretty significant imposition of a working condition for everybody across the board. I know we have some questions about the financial piece of it as well, but any of the labor groups that we're talking about today have approached or taken a position or tried to negotiate this work condition? Because it would seem to be pretty significant. Any of them?
Commissioner Showalter, are you aware? Did you hear the question?
Mr. Chair, Senator, we have no current requests to bargain. We have had meet and confer meetings with a number of unions to talk through the policy and understand their concerns. We understand that these are issues that their members are concerned with on both sides of the issue, and want to make sure that they've got the information and understanding of how this policy works, how we're going to try to implement it, and make sure that they can continue to get that information to their members as well. And so we continue that dialogue.
Senator Karen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Commissioner Showalter. So just a last follow-up question. So as it relates to the additional costs and the time that those who choose, I thought I saw the last ad, about 35% of the employees were not vaccinated, thus are required to test weekly. I've been hearing from multiple, especially in the MnDOT world, that this is going to crush their budgets or is already having an impact in the future of, one, the workforce not being available to perform because of the time it takes to go do it, and thus, as well as the cost. Could you cover what are the costs? Which brand and type of test are we doing? Who's carrying the cost of testing? What's the total cost that we're incurring for each of these tests on a weekly basis?
Thank you, Senator Karen. There's an article in the Pioneer Press on correction workers this morning. So, Commissioner, I'm curious to hear your answer.
Mr. Chair, Senator, appreciate it. We're working on some questions for, I know, Senator Abler. I'm not quite sure of the specific exact brands or dosages that are being administered for tests or how we're testing. I do know that we're doing it in a number of different ways, trying to make sure that we can meet employees wherever they're at, whether in a central testing facility, whether in the office, or in cases where employees are isolated remotely. I do want to underscore that this policy really affects only a portion of our workforce, first of all. It affects only those who are working in a office or out of in a work setting. So coming into the office, coming into the clinic, coming into provide congregate care services. In those instances, they would be subject to the policy. If somebody is working at home and not coming into the office, or doesn't potentially need to come into the office, they would not be covered by this policy. I would note that you said about 35% of the state employees are going to be tested. That's actually, I think, a high estimate, and probably a high estimate in a couple of ways. One is that we've already had about 7 out of 10 state employees attesting to vaccination status. But beyond that is that because a lot of employees don't come into the office all the time, they won't need to be tested all the time either. And so there is a number of things that we're learning on a very regular basis as we're trying to understand how this works. And so I respect the question that you had regarding the Department of Transportation's budget, but know that some of your going assumptions, we're still learning. I wouldn't jump to conclusions. And I would finally just say that the cost of testing isn't something that it will be picked up by the MnDOT budget. We have worked with federal government. We expect that FEMA, and in fact, we have secured agreement that FEMA will cover the cost of those tests. So as the portion of those MnDOT employees or other state employees are tested, state agencies will be reimbursed, state agency will be reimbursed for the cost of those tests. So we're trying to keep the time to a minimum so that this is a minimal diversion of employee time. We're working to make sure that the cost of tests are covered. And I just have to push back a little bit because there's also the cost of getting sick. And that is a very real cost. We saw that during the last year, year and a half, and we could see that again going into the future. And so there are costs, there are operating risks, and we're trying to avoid that higher cost of more people getting sick in the workplace by having a policy that makes sure that we detect, we prevent, we avoid those costs and the spreading of illness in state workplaces.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Senator Cran.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioner Showalter. I loved your description of what your goals were. If it was true and comprehensive, it would also include natural antibodies for those who have contracted the disease and or the virus and thus have the antibodies. So we appear to be washing right past that. You described a very comprehensive process and we're looking at everything. Yet the one key thing of those that have the antibodies, those that had the virus with or without symptoms, and thus have the natural antibodies, which is equally as valuable, so or should be considered. And so if it was comprehensive, that would be great. I'll defer to somebody else. I have one other line of questioning, then I'll wait till later. Thank you.
You sure you don't want to ask it quick, just in case we get to a vote here quick?
Mr. Chair, thank you.
I don't think by hands we are, but I'm just kind of kidding.
You offered. Sorry for everybody else who's in line. So telecommuting, you made reference to so many people. So when I came into this role, we had lots of people working from home that didn't live in Minnesota or anywhere near Minnesota. There's some mention, I think, of one of the conditions that grants some power or maybe some additional capabilities for MMB to negotiate telecommuting policies. What does that look like? I hear a bunch of code words being utilized that we're in a new normal. We agree there's many things that will change, but are there any particular components in this new labor agreement across any of them in which changes the plans as it relates to telecommuting? Are we going to be, requiring people to come back? If so, what is that? And is that a part? Again, that's a significant work condition as well. And if it's not being negotiated in the contract, again, I would ask, how is that possible when we're now 18 months or 19 or 20 months into this process? So tell me a little bit about what's happening in the telecommuting world, because I'm struggling to see that it's a significant issue. And I ask that because I see challenges in our service delivery and from my constituents. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Commissioner Showalter.
Mr. Chair, Senator, I'll start by answering that. I want to turn over to Deputy Commissioner just to follow up on a couple of provisions of it. But I just want to be real clear. The telework as a policy has in it the assumption that an employee can show up and maybe called at whatever time to be in the office space. So, you started with this remote work or kind of flagration of people in other states. Telework, by its definition, it means that somebody can actually drop by the office if needed. And what we're really trying to work towards is how to get the state's work done better and best, both for the benefit of the citizens of Minnesota, to minimize cost, and ultimately to make sure that we have a really engaged and productive workforce. So I just want to turn it over to the Deputy Commissioner to talk about those provisions a little bit more and where we're at right now on our telework policy.
Thank you, Ms. Batson. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Lilly. Yeah, I'm really glad this topic came up. It's a topic that I'm very interested in and frankly excited about. The COVID pandemic really changed everything in terms of telecommuting with the state workforce. This was prior to COVID. Telecommuting was not a widespread practice in state government. And then what we saw in March of 2020, when we all had to go work from home almost overnight, we saw that it really was something that could work well and be effective. So we have now an enterprise telework policy that basically says if an employee can do their job via telework, and I want to be clear that not all jobs can, but if an employee can do their job via telework, they should have the opportunity to telework and to work with their employer to develop a telework schedule that works for both parties. Mape especially has been very interested in this topic. And so we've had a lot of conversations with them, given their interest and given the fact that this is really new and we're still getting our sea legs and gathering experience about how this is working. But we do have pilot language with Mape that give employees the ability to ask questions about their telework status and to get more information from management about why or why not they are given the ability to telework. Senator Cran, I don't know if that addressed all of the questions, but happy to answer any more that you might have.
Senator Cran,
Thank you, Ms. Batson. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Batson. So I understand the goal and desire. What I have the concern is, you know, in 2017, I think there were 400 people who lived in excess of 100 miles from the Minnesota border. We had the Mississippi watershed manager lives in Sonoma Valley, California. Regardless of that, it was a telecommuting policy. It was a bad implementation of a policy because not everybody in that business unit, which because it required on-hands, in-person support as a function of their job, the other 7 people in the business unit were not allowed to do that. And so as I see our transformation, I've come from that world. I spent 20 years in an office from home, but the level of accountability baked in is very different. And so I think we've struggled as far as having skin in the game when you're no longer a resident of the state, and we'll likely see a far greater number of those no longer be a resident of the state. And we've struggled in many cases to manage and to optimize and maximize our workforce. And I share that goal of retraining, and I've had that conversation with the commissioner, and I think Senator Isaacson agreed that we would work on that. So we could be in that factor of we can prove we're getting great value and we have all the tools to manage, but we haven't done that. And so we haven't really changed anything up to the point to where we're going to now then have remote people. And so when you're not accessible, there's a level of accountability from a citizen perspective that makes it struggling, or that it's struggling because they have no other government to select from. They are forced to deal with our state government for a variety of reasons. Now, moving to a workforce, and there's a pretty good trend if you haven't seen it, they're moving to no income tax states. And so are we going to have more and more of our state employees move to no income tax states? And if we are, and I think Commissioner Showalter said that we should be maximizing the workforce, lowering our costs, and increasing productivity. Love all that. I also want to have a conversation with Commissioner Showalter and the governor to achieve those goals. But when you have no skin in the game, and implementation of the role of everyone's job is very impactful to all residents of Minnesota. How do we do that in a remote environment when we're removing all of the hooks and ties to providing service? Because our job is singly to provide service to Minnesota citizens, and they have no other choice. So I think it changes the dynamics of what happens in a commercial world relative to our government world. And so I would like to know, and I will be putting a request in to Commissioner Showalter and Commissioner Batson of what is that workforce and where do they all live now? Because it's going to be very impactful. And if that's the case, that we want the best and brightest from everywhere, why would we have full-time employees and not just contract for those services from all over the world to get the best services? So those are my questions. So if you have any additional comments that would help me understand how we're managing for greater productivity in this environment, I'd be welcome to hear it. But right now I see it as a pretty big challenge.
Thank you, Senator Crand. Any quick comments from either commissioner, or should we move on? At this point, you've heard the question, and it sounds like it'll be ongoing. It is fascinating as the world changes.
It is.
Chair Lilly, if I could just quickly make one distinction for the committee. We have both a enterprise telework policy and we have a new enterprise remote worker policy. And as this situation is changing, we also share Senator Cran's concerns and questions. And so the distinction between our two policies, one is the telework policy really applies to the majority of state workers. The distinction with the remote worker policy is that's a new policy, and that allows employees to work from out of state only when the work itself needs to be done from another location, or only in instances where the talent that we are looking for is so specific and so hard to find that the only way to fill the job would be to hire someone from another state. But what we're really trying to do overall is the maximum to ensure that state employment goes to Minnesotans or people living very near to Minnesota and commuting in, and that the economic benefit of that employment stays as close to Minnesota as possible too.
Thank you, Ms. Batson. I think now's a good time, right? Senator Cran, I think we can move on. Senator Bingham, thank you for your patience, and go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I just want to say that I'm wondering where all of a sudden we got some epidemiologists that are experts in all this stuff with antibodies and vaccines and stuff. But I do know that there are epidemiologists in Mape. So I just want to say that. I also want to take a little bit more of a positive outlook on this. It's been a tough year for our employees, whether it's been with COVID personally, but also in the workplace. And we've all had to get through that and together, and to have contracts like this that are fair and collectively bargained in good faith, done on time, and will be transparent for the employees to know that their work of bargaining, which is their right, is going to be handled in a timely manner, is very important for them, but also for the state, for continuity of work, and making sure that they know what to expect, because they're the reason our state continues to function at such a high level. And we've asked so much of them during these times, and we appreciate it. During this interim that we have, I've had the honor of doing a lot of different tours, whether it's been up at Camp Ripley or with law enforcement, Washington County, Dakota County, sheriff's departments and jails. And, this contract for law enforcement, I know the county folks are separate, but is a big deal for making sure that they get some things upgraded and updated that they've been expecting, and quite frankly, they need. And so I'm appreciative of the collaboration and the positive relationship between the bargaining units and how they were able to advocate for their needs, and the state to be able to deliver on them. And just want to thank everybody for that, and to thank the employees. And I know we're not done. We have some outstanding contracts here, but I think we just gotta take some time here to be appreciative and be blessed and thankful for the work that our employees have done, whether they're correctional officers, conservation officers, epidemiologists by trade in school and education, and public health nurses, and all the other wonderful jobs that make our state function. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Bingham. Thank you very much. Representative Joachim. Hi, go ahead when you're ready, please.
Thank you, Chair Lilly. And actually, the commissioner answered one of the questions I had, and that was about the COVID testing and federal dollars being able to be used for that. And just to quickly add to what Senator Bingham said, safe and healthy work environments are efficient and effective work environments, and healthy people cost a lot less money. It's a lot more money to have an employee out because of COVID or having to quarantine because they haven't taken the steps to make it a healthy environment. So just keeping that in mind. And I just want to thank MMB for working with our organizations to make sure these contracts are fair and competitive. And the competitive part is the one thing I would kind of want to really push on. We are losing good folks to other parts of the country. I know for a fact I have an epidemiologist in my district who's talked to me quite a lot, and we're losing epidemiologists to other states because of contracts. So it's important for us to also get some of the best workers we can in state government and to make sure that we're competitive to do that, especially in our IT. And we could go on and on about the need we have for IT when, as a course of business, people have to give us their information and we should be keeping it safe. So just want to thank everybody for working on this. I hope going forward, the rest of the contracts are as fair and competitive. And just to remember that the folks we're talking about are the ones that take care of our air and water quality. They work in our corrections department. They work in direct care and treatment. They work in our Department of Economic and Deed. They're working in some of our state departments that really kept us all afloat during COVID. So thank you. And I will definitely be voting yes today.
Thank you, Representative Joachim, and thank you for your comments. Senator Isaacson.
Thank you. I'm just really pleased with what I'm seeing here and in my conversations with our stakeholders and getting some contracts across the board that I think match what our needs are. Frankly, I don't think enough can be said about what our state brings to the table and largely how great it is because precisely the work that's being done by Mape and Afscme and other groups that I think really represent and take on many of the tough issues of the rubber hits the road of our state and getting things done in a tangible kind of way. So I'm excited about that. I'm cautious about wading into some of the things that Senator Cran said, especially in light of how science works. But I do think that we should be cautious about understanding and when we hear things in the media versus what we know our scientists are saying. And I'm just hopeful that MMB is continuing to stay focused on that. And I appreciate the good work that's done, and I'm looking forward to voting for this. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Isaacson. I see Representative Albright, you left some questions perhaps on the table, or you want to make a motion to vote. I wasn't sure. No, go ahead, Representative Albright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to follow up with the Deputy Commissioner because there were some questions raised by Senator Cran, and I just wanted to maybe get some clarification. And you mentioned, Deputy Commissioner, that there is a class, or maybe the wrong word, or policy dealing with people who work remotely. And then you also described another group that is I don't remember the term that you used.
Ms. Batson, thank you.
Yes, the two policies that I referenced, one is the telework policy,
yep.
And the other is the remote work policy. And in the media and with other employers, you might hear these terms used interchangeably, but they are two very distinct things for us. The telework policy is mostly for people who live in and commutable to Minnesota, maybe near the borders with Wisconsin and Iowa. And that is, predicated on the fact that there are times when they may need to come into the workplace, and we want to reserve the right to do that. The remote work policy is really exactly as it says, and it's for employees who their work is exclusively remote. And they would come into the workplace very rarely, if at all. And we are really, the policy focuses remote work on employees whose work has to be done in another geographic location. Some agencies have staff that have to work in a specific region nationally, or employees whose skill sets and backgrounds are so rare that the only way that the state could fill that job would be to hire someone working in a remote location. But these are very isolated incidents compared to the telework policy, which is far broader in its application.
Thank you, Ms. Batson. Representative Albright?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Batson, so getting to the telecommuting policy then, and thank you for that clarification, that makes good sense. But when you talk about the telecommuting policy then, how is that arrived at in terms of determine who can or cannot, in terms of, going back to what Senator Cran said about the front-facing responsibility of these folks to deal, their job is to deal with the public, right? And in an age where people are just absolutely, demanding is probably too strong a word, maybe expecting is a better word, expecting to have interaction with a person when they arrive either at the DMV or whatever have you, for the services that they are looking for the state to follow through on in their obligation. So I guess my question is, first, how do you determine that definition of who can or cannot telecommute?
Ms. Batson?
Yes, thank you. The policy says that determination is really based on business need. And so to look at business need, we've really instructed state agencies to look at the position description and to look at the needs of that work unit that the individual works in. And there are plenty of state jobs that, for very good reasons, cannot be done through telework. Exactly the sort of customer service situations that you described are in our correctional facilities, in our state hospitals. Many state jobs need to be done in the workplace. But we really go back to the business need, to the position description, and to the needs of that work unit.
Mr. Chair, I just have kind of a two-pronged final question, but I thank you for your patience with me.
Thank you.
So I understand that this is a policy that is arrived at between the employer management and the employees. So I'm wondering if was this included in the collective bargaining discussions as so far as to putting it in writing so that everyone understands what's going on, and if not, why?
Ms. Batson?
Yes, this was definitely part of our discussions, especially with Mape. And we do have language with Mape that is a pilot around the decisions made around telework and whether a job can be done via telework. I just want to state, and we have shared this with our labor partners as well, just a reminder that we are on the very early edge of this. And these are all policies that are quite new within the past 18 months, and we're learning a lot, and we're doing a lot of work with other national groups and other jurisdictions around understanding what makes these hybrid work environments work and productive. So we have asked for some grace to proceed a little slowly with this so that we can learn as we're doing and make the very best decisions possible. But just a reminder that this is all fairly new for us.
Representative Albright, was that the
Thank you,
two-prong or one-prong there?
This is the follow-up, and it's more of a curiosity, but I know that, and to your point, Deputy Commissioner, this has been an evolving situation that's been brought on to us, not of our own doing, and certainly appreciate yours and the commissioners adapting to the circumstances that prevail upon, state workers, on any given day and moment. But I think it would be helpful if we could see at some point, and I don't know if this comes through the SER or comes through one of the other committees, whether it be State Government Finance or something, to understand more fully in terms of the context, in terms of how many, we're working remotely, how many were telecommuting, say, back in 17, and then march forward and to determine, oh, wow, where have we come from with this and in the evolution of this policy, so that we have maybe a context and a baseline to really appreciate where our state workers are located and what they're doing, so that we can support them, right? But also then look at identifying maybe a change in the performance measurements as well, that we want to provide credibly, so that we can report back to the people that are funding their salaries that they are getting value for what is being provided. And that is not a denigration of any of the work that these people do. They're highly prized and for what they do. But I think it's an accountability that they would appreciate, informing the legislature in terms of how things are working, and provide feedback in terms of how they might work better, and how the state could improve in providing those services that, as Senator Coran said, are just absolutely the essential part of why state government operates. So I'll leave that as an open comment, maybe a request that the chair and you can work on maybe bringing back to us, or some other committee that would be pertinent to that information. So thank you.
Well, I think we're getting to the end. I have a motion before me made by Senator Isaacson. I was wondering if Sally, I'm looking for your name. Ms. Smith, not your name, but I was wondering if you could pop up, Ms. Olson, sorry. If you could pop up the actual SER1 so people can see it.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I'll do that for you. So that
okay.
Ms. Olson can handle other technical logistics.
Okay.
That would be okay.
I'm sorry, Ms. Olson. So, Senator Isaacson, you had
Senator Bingham was first.
Oh, Senator Bingham?
Yeah, one, I would just say about the whole telecommuting thing, I think it makes us more competitive, more versatile, and allows to each of these unique positions to kind of have some autonomy over how they best function within their department. But Mr. Chair, I would respectfully request a roll call on this vote.
Okay, a roll call has been asked for and will be given. I just want to thank all members and for really a good discussion. There's a very robust discussion, and Commissioner and your team, I really want to thank you for and just being open to questions. And some of them were a little bit a stretch, but I'm happy to have them personally. I'm not against having broader discussion, and you were open to that, and your team, and I just want to say I appreciate that.
Mr. Chairman.
The House.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Senator Newman. Yes, sir.
I apologize. I cannot find the button.
Oh, did you have your hand up? Oh my goodness.
No, I haven't, because I can't find the button.
Oh, no, but I certainly want to recognize you.
No, that's fine.
But Senator Newman,
Chairman,
please, before we go on.
I would very much like to vote on these contracts independent of one another.
Yes, sir.
And primarily with the MLEA contract, because the legislature was very, very involved in how that contract was put together. So, Mr. Chairman, I would move to amend the Isaacson motion and I don't know if this is going to be proper procedure or not, but I'd move to amend the Isaacson motion that we take up SER2, which is the resolution to approve the MLEA association contract.
Okay, we do have, so you would amend it. I guess I'm not even sure how that, so the amendment to take up, yes, so it will replace the one and have it be two. So any questions to the amendment? Senator Isaacson?
Yeah, I don't I don't know why we would do this. Unless I guess maybe didn't want to vote on another contract or something, but I see no reason to split these up. I want to get this done and get moving on with my day. So I'd rather we just voted and got it over with. Thank you.
Mr.
Right,
Chair,
I
To
see
be clear,
Senator,
I oppose the Newman amendment to my motion.
Mr.
Right.
Chair,
Senator Benson.
could you clarify, this committee is different than any other committee when it comes to voting. And if there's a tie vote on this provision, what happens to the language Senator Newman has adopted?
So if we were to have a tie vote, it would not go into effect. It would, on any of it, the original motion or this amended motion. So they would not.
Mr. Chair, could I ask for clarification?
So they,
from
I mean, the
Ms.
contracts
Weber?
would go into effect, but they would, it would not pass technically.
Mr. Chair, I think.
I'll
the
have,
committee-
maybe I'll pass it to Mr. Gehring and have you kind of talk us through Mr. Gehring, I saw you pop up and I know you're quite good at this chess game, so. Mr. Gehring.
Mr. Chair, for the record, Matt Gehring from House Research. I think the result of the motion that you have on the table here is just that Senator Newman's amendment to the motion would fail. I don't know that it would be interpreted as a rejection of the underlying contract because he is just moving to amend the motion itself.
Oh, right. We're on the original.
Mr. Chair, it was my
Yes,
understanding
Senator Benson.
that in SER, when motions are voted on and there's a tie, that the language moves forward. In all of our other legislative committees, language dies on a tie.
Mr.
So
Chair.
I'd like clarification before we move to any vote.
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Weber.
for the record, I'm Michelle Weber, the Executive Director of the LCC, and I'll stop sharing my screen while we're talking this through. So what would occur is if there is a tie vote, the motion does not pass. And the underlying statute related to the contracts would fall into effect, meaning that the SER did neither reject or accept the contracts, and the contracts go into effect 30 days after their submission.
Mr. Chair, that is not what she's asking. What she's asking is if there is a tie vote.
Senator Isaacson.
If there is a tie vote on the amendment, does the language of the amendment pass forward? Am I correct, Senator Benson? Right. And I think to be clear about that, an amendment doesn't pass, it doesn't go forward. Even if we pass, even if we have a tie vote on the actual bill, the resolution, it doesn't go forward. The contracts go into effect until our next session.
Ms. Weber.
Mr. Chair, yes, that's correct. So the first action that the SER would consider right now is Senator Newman's motion to amend or substitute the resolution that was provided by Senator Isaacson with resolution number 2. So that would be the first vote that the SER would consider. If there's a tie vote on that, then it reverts back to the original motion of SER resolution number 1 that Senator Isaacson moved earlier in the meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Weber. And that is my understanding as well. And but I appreciate it, Senator Benson. It's actually a good question. So to the motion made by the motion to amend.
Mr. Chairman, could we have a roll call, please?
Senator Newman's requesting a roll call. I'm going to speak against this. I think that we should move ahead with all the contracts. Valued members of our team, we did that in the House. We passed the contracts, the pay raise already through rules, and they went on, and I think we should do that with our other teams as well. So with that, I will call the roll on the amendment, or ask Ms. Olson, will you go ahead when you're ready?
Chair Lilly?
No.
Representative Albright?
Yes.
Representative Carlson? Representative Carlson? I think that was a no. Representative O'Neill?
Hear me now?
Aye.
Yes.
Okay, Carlson's a no.
Representative Joachim?
No.
Senator Benson?
Yes.
Senator Bigham?
No.
Senator Isaacson?
No.
Senator Cran?
Yes.
Senator Newman?
Yes.
5 and 5.
So Senator Newman's amendment to the original Isaacson motion has failed to pass. And so we're back to the original Isaacson motion. Any further discussion to the motion? And there has been a roll call requested. Seeing no hands or no interest in discussion. So Ms. Olson, will you call the roll, please?
Chair Lilly?
Aye.
Representative Albright?
Aye.
Representative Carlson?
Carlson, yes.
Representative O'Neill?
O'Neill, aye.
Representative Joachim?
Aye.
Senator Benson?
Aye.
Senator Bigham?
Aye.
Senator Isaacson?
Aye.
Senator Cran?
Aye.
Senator Newman?
No.
9 yes, 1 no.
So with that, the Isaacson, the SER1 has passed, and again, I'd like to thank all the members for showing up today, and seriously the good discussion. And Commissioner and your team, thank you for your work, and also want to thank our team of our state workers, and they do a good job, and we're very blessed as a state, and I think that's shown by the vote of all the members today. I don't believe we have anything further on the agenda. I'm looking for Ms. Weber to see a nod or anything, and I think we're good to go. As other contracts come down the pike, we might have other opportunities to meet, and if not, we'll. I thank everyone for their time today and service to Minnesota. Thank you. Bye, everyone. We're adjourned.